What is going on, y'all? It's Roanoke Gaming here, coming at you with some more lore on Titanfall. I know my other video says part 1, so this is, I suppose, technically part 2. This one will be going over the lore and the origins of the Militia, the IMC's counterpart. If this is your type of video, make sure to hit that subscribe button on the bottom right of the screen and give it a like. So grab your super inaccurate flatline rifle, strap into your old salvage Titan, because we are dropping into this lore on the Militia. Where did it all start? Why are these two groups fighting? How did humanity even make it out this far? Well, my previous video goes in depth on how the frontier was first colonized, but in case you don't have that kind of time, I'll give you a bit of a crash course on it. Hammond Industries started in the core systems. The core systems needed resources. Hammond Industries was founded. Hammond Industries led the charge in exploration. Hammond Industries grew militant. Soldiers fought. Soldiers given land in the frontier. Interest in the frontier waned. Hammond Industries left due to not being interested. Colonies flourished in frontier. Hammond Industries returned. Greed ensued. Imminent domain frontier. Frontier angry. So, now that we're all caught up after that exceedingly brief description, I would highly recommend checking out part 1. And not just because I created and spent time on it, but because it will tell you everything that you actually need to know. So why and how did the Militia form exactly? When Hammond Industries was first doing warring with some of the individual planets and groups that rebelled essentially, the soldiers were given land. When they were given land, they moved out into the frontier and began to set up shop. Assuming that this was going to become sort of like the core systems in terms of life and population, they built their lives out there. However, Hammond Industries would pack up and leave soon after. This left the soldiers of these planets to fend for themselves. They ended up flourishing, however, and life was good for a time. Upon the IMC, formerly Hammond Industries, return, they began taking land and resources away from the people that had lived there originally. The colonists did not take too kindly to this intrusion and began to become disgruntled. Eventually, the IMC pushed them too far and fighting began to erupt. The IMC would go on to defend their position by saying that since we were the ones that founded it first and set you up with this land, we could basically come back and take whatever we want. So, as you can see, that causes a few issues. There are two eras for the Militia, pre- and post-Demeter, and this marks the major battle won by the Militia in their struggle for the freedom. What did the Militia look like before the battle for Demeter? The Militia was in its infancy at this point, so imagine a bunch of disorganized farmers with pitchforks. That was the Militia. They were made up of anyone who would fight, or anyone who could fight, no matter their association. Much like any in society, or maritime society at least, pirates, mercenaries, civilians, captains, borderline security personnel, they all exist. These groups would be forced to join ranks to become the Militia. As you can imagine, this created a lot of issues over time. The pirates may have approached the IMC more ruthlessly, burning, pillaging, committing war crimes, simply due to the fact that this is how they would have handled things to begin with. The mercenaries would only fight if the money was good enough, but they would fight nonetheless. The security personnel may not have seen this as an issue, but would be fighting because they were essentially forced into it. And potentially the civilians would have looked at this more as a negotiation issue, and this is because they really had no experience with fighting. So all these groups culminated together into one lot of problems. To say the Militia at first did not see eye to eye would be putting things rather lightly. Fights sometimes broke out between the groups in the Militia on how to approach problems, what protocol to follow, and how to handle prisoners if caught. There is one thing that they could all agree on, however, was that the IMC needed to be stopped. Fighting continued to rage in smaller pockets prior to the actual Frontier War. This was known as the Titan Wars. The Titan Wars were launched purely due to the tensions forming between IMC and the Militia. This eventually led to the mutiny of James McAllen due to how the IMC was treating the civilians on the frontier. It is said that if James had not switched sides, then the Militia would have eventually lost. However, due to the fact that he did, this gave the Militia a foothold and a chance to turn the tides. The IMC technically won the Titan Wars as their presence is still noted in the frontier, but they ended up losing one of their best. This led into a secondary war that went much better for the Militia, and this is known as the Frontier War. This is the big puppy. The war saw both sides, while still a little sloppy for the Militia, much more organized. McAllen had already mutinied and the IMC began to crack down on the Militia much harder. Titanfall 1 takes place during this point. Vice Admiral Graves was sent after the Militia First Fleet. the fleet began to run low on fuel and supplies and attempted to strike at Site M41 on planet Victor. They would be forced to make a jump into an unexplored area where Graves would come face to face with the IMC and what they were doing with the innocent civilians. And being IMC himself, he was allowed to be in the area, but there was some, I will say, war crime atrocities going on. This would successfully turn him towards the militia, and this would set the board for the attack on Demeter. Utilizing both McAllen and Graves and their knowledge of the IMC, the militia struck at Demeter. This had rippling effects for the IMC. They would first be cut off from the core systems and unable to get home to receive aid and supplies. This cut off a large portion of the fleet from being able to help as well. This would also destroy and stop the almost endless outpouring of machine soldiers used to fight the militia. Unfortunately, during this time, James McAllen would lose his life after the blast on Demeter, as well as you who was piloting the pilot. The militia, however, would go on fighting. So there we have it, the beginnings of the militia and their first victory. Well, first major victory. So check it out. This one I am making into a series, I'm pretty sure. I'll still be doing my other lore videos as well, but the next video on the Titanfall will be going over the tech and how they achieved these women's pre-Demeter. And then after that, I'm thinking, what happens after Demeter? If this is your thing, why not like and subscribe so you can see when I upload? I would definitely appreciate it. Until then, I will catch y'all in the next one.